முக்கியமான சக்தியா இருந்திருக்கு. நம்ம செய்திகள் எல்லாம் பார்க்கும்பொழுது எப்படி இஸ்ரேல் தரப்பு பாலஸ்தீன் தரப்பை நம்ம கேட்டிருக்கிறோமோ அதே போல ஐநாவுடைய கருத்து என்பது முக்கியத்துவம் பெறுகிறது. காரணம் என்னவென்றால் இந்த பிராந்தியத்துல வசிக்கக்கூடிய பல லட்சக்கணக்கான பாலஸ்தீனிய அகதிகளுக்கு பொறுப்பான அமைப்பு இந்த அமைப்பு தான். இந்த அமைப்புடைய இயக்குனர் உன்ராவுடைய இயக்குனர் மேற்கு கரைக்கான இயக்குனர் திரு ஆடம் புலூகோஸ் நம்மோடு இணைந்திருக்கிறார். Thank you very much for talking to Thanthi TV amidst these challenging circumstances. At the outset, could you explain our viewers what is your agency doing in this region?
Thank you.
Talk to us about UNRWA.
Sure, very good. Now, first, thank you very much. I'm quite pleased to bring this story to the Indian public. I understand you have something like 35 million viewers, and not only in India but also Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. So it's good that this story. We have programs in Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza. Gaza has been the focus of the media attention in the last couple of weeks since the 7th of October, rightly so. And maybe it's easy if I show on the map if the camera can see this. This is Israel, and this is the occupied Palestine territories of the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza is a very small place. Gaza is about 45 kilometers long by, at its widest point, about 20 kilometers, with 2.2 million people, very densely populated. There's a war, in fact, declared by Israel on Gaza now, which is pushing almost 1 million people south into the southern part of Gaza. So all of the attention of the UN is on Gaza as we try to create a humanitarian corridor and try to have services delivered. The creation of the state of Israel
and displacement of the Palestinians,
and the displacement of the Palestinians, which then pushed into many places: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza. So UNRWA has these 5 fields of operation, what we call field offices. My responsibility is the West Bank. This is the West Bank. It's a larger map of the West Bank. So you have Jordan here, and then we have East Jerusalem. Within this area, we provide services to something like 900,000 Palestine
close to a
refugees.
million.
Yes, close to a million, and they're a bit scattered across this area. We have 19 refugee camps. Those camps accommodate something like 1/3 of that population. 2/3 of the people live in villages or other locations that are not in a designated refugee camp. But the camps are not a refugee camp that you might imagine from the news of a tented city. These were originally tented villages that became sort of concrete, and they're now really very dense, very densely populated mini cities that are attached or adjacent to other cities. In those locations, we provide core services to the population in the way of education, health services, relief services, microfinance programs, engineering programs. We're quasi-governmental.
So practically, UN runs their lives.
The UN runs all of the services that are associated with their status of being a refugee. So they have a right under international. We have a mandate from the General Assembly of the United Nations, of which India is a part, of course, right? Yes. So this, so it is important for all of us to understand this dynamic. It's not a local problem. It is an issue which is now gaining international occupation. So if we back up again at the time of the creation of the State of Israel, right, there was an agreement of how this land would be parceled out. And that decision has never been followed by Israel. And so Israel has had a policy.
The partition plan, you mean?
The partition plan. And so Israel has since that time segmented and parceled out this land and shrunk that land. So Gaza, what we're looking at now, this tiny thing that we call the Gaza Strip, right, was in fact quite larger. It went into this area here. So Gaza was quite large. The West Bank but it's not, in fact, it's chopped up into bits and pieces.
The Israeli territory is running in between.
Exactly. Israeli communities inside the West Bank that might be immediately adjacent to a Palestinian village, and there you have lots of tensions.
And the walls separating these two.
And you have often significant concrete barrier walls, big ones, many meters high, that separate one community from another, one road from another, one bus stop from another. So you have a completely separated and division.
So these two two communities, though they live in the same geographical landmass, they are separated. They live as two different communities.
Absolutely. Even the number of the identification cards they have, the movements of those Palestinians is highly restricted. So the movement out of the West Bank into Israel to work, let's say, you need a permit and you need to be authorized by Israel to come into Israel to work. So Israel is a military
policy, but you acknowledge that.
Well, this is the logic, right? I mean, if you have the difference is that this is not a border between two countries, right? So Bangladesh and India, Bangladesh and Pakistan have borders. They're often disputed. I know that. I've worked in the region. But there are designated borders moving into Bangladesh for work purposes. You need a work permit or you need normal.
வங்கதேசத்திற்கும் இந்தியாவிற்கும் இருக்கின்ற எல்லை போல அல்லது பாகிஸ்தானிற்கும் இந்தியாவிற்கும் இருக்கின்ற எல்லை போல நான் அந்த பகுதிகளிலே பணிபுரிந்திருக்கிறேன். அதை போன்ற எல்லை அல்ல இது.
Just two countries that happen to be neighbors, right? So the military occupation more or less controls all of the aspects of life. The movement of goods, the access to services such as water, electricity, natural resources.
இந்த பகுதிகளை ஆக்கிரமித்திருப்பது இந்த பகுதியின் வாழ்க்கையை பெரும்பாலும் பாதிக்கிறது. பொருள்கள் இங்கிருந்து அங்கு செல்ல முடியாது.
Many years Gaza has been essentially cut off. It's often described as the world's largest open-air prison, because once you're in Gaza, it's all Gazans and people are going about their lives, but they can't really get out. And so that's this is and you have Egypt on one side, the Mediterranean,
உண்மையிலேயே உலகின் ஒரு பெரிய சிறைச்சாலை போல இருக்கிறது. நீங்கள் காசாவிற்குள் நுழைந்து விட்டால் அங்கே உங்கள் செயல்பாடுகளை செய்யலாம், ஆனால் அங்கிருந்து நீங்கள் வெளியே செல்வது என்பதெல்லாம் சாத்தியமில்லை.
It's very very restricted. Which is
so Palestinians cannot move from one town to another?
That's correct. At the moment, because of the current security situation, because of the war, there are now new
அப்படியானால் பாலஸ்தீனியர்கள் ஒரு நகரத்தில் இன்னொரு நகரத்திற்கு இடம்பெயர முடியாது என்று சொல்லுகிறீர்களா? ஆமா, நீங்கள் சொல்லுவது சரிதான். அவர்கள் ஒரு நகரத்திலிருந்து இன்னொரு நகரத்திற்கு இடம்பெயர முடியாது.
And we are providing direct services, schooling, health center, which means we need to move the nurses from their home to their place of work. And in many cases, they can't do that if they're segmented now because of the heightened security. And along the way, there are Israeli military checkpoints and things, which have existed for many years. But in addition, there are settlers. These are those that live in the settlements. Those are Israelis that are in those settlements. Getting just close to 300 people killed this year, which is over double. It will soon be double what it was last year at this time.
300?
Yeah, 300 killed this year.
Now there's a lot of global focus and attention on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. What do you hear from your colleagues there? The current situation, the humanitarian crisis.
First, I'll use this opportunity, as I do in every opportunity, to commend the United Nations staff that are on the ground, and particularly UNRWA. UNRWA has 13,000 staff in Gaza.
13,000?
13,000.
Wow.
Some 5,000 of them, my colleagues are telling me, are working every day, even in these conditions, which is absolutely remarkable. Because you have to understand that it's not, for example, like a disaster, that there may have been an earthquake in one area and everybody had to flee to safety. Here you have a very dense, small area. You have no place to escape to. You can't run into Israel, you can't run into Egypt, and you can't go into the sea. So you're really stuck.
இந்த பகுதியிலிருந்து நீங்கள் இஸ்ரேலுக்குள் செல்ல முடியாது, நீங்கள் எகிப்துக்குள் செல்ல முடியாது, கடலுக்கும் செல்ல முடியாது. அதை போன்று எல்லா புறத்திலிருந்தும் இவர்கள் கூட்டப்பட்டிருக்கிறார்கள்.
It's confined to the north? Is it?
It's not confined to the north. In fact, just the other day, was it 2 days ago, something like 400 people died in the south, were killed in the south, and maybe, no, 400 people were killed, 250 of them were in the south.
இது போன்ற ஒரு நிலைமை காசாவின் வடபகுதியில் மட்டும்தான் இருக்கிறதா? இல்லை, காசாவின் வடபகுதியில் மட்டுமல்ல, காசாவின் தென்பகுதியில் கூட சில நாட்களுக்கு கூட 400 பேர் இறந்திருக்கிறார்கள்.
Move to the south, you also say south is not safe and south is bombarded too.
That's correct. That's what we're actually witnessing, is that
வடக்கில் இருக்கும் மக்களை தெற்குக்கு நகர்ந்து செல்லுமாறு கூறுகின்ற அதே நேரத்தில் தெற்கு பகுதியிலும் தாக்குதல்கள் நடக்கின்றன என நீங்கள் கூறுகிறீர்களா? ஆமாம், அப்படிதான் நடக்கிறது.
which was very difficult for 1 million people to move in a congested area with damaged roads and no infrastructure and no fuel and no electricity to actually move 1 million people. And where would they go? Right? We have a lot of logistics it's meant to be
மக்கள் ஒரு பகுதியிலிருந்து இன்னொரு பகுதிக்கு நகர்ந்து செல்வது என்பதெல்லாம் மிகவும் கஷ்டமான ஒரு விஷயம்.
Living in that place now. 8,000 displaced persons are in the UNRWA facility at this very moment, with only a couple of toilets. You know, it's not designed for this. So the huge number of people delivery of service is nearly impossible.
What about the UN infrastructure? Do you think it's
தேவையான பொருட்களை ஐநா கொண்டு செல்வது என்பதெல்லாம் மிகவும் சிரமமான விஷயம்.
Water network, power sources, hospitals.
இங்கே சாலைகள் சரியாக இல்லை, மருத்துவமனைகள் இல்லை,
as a building crumbles,
எந்த விதமான வசதிகளும் மக்களுக்கு இல்லை.
There's damage to a hospital which is adjacent to, I don't know, a place of worship, mosques, churches being hit, those kinds of things. So for us, we're trying so desperately in the UN to have this open humanitarian corridor, particularly UNRWA, because we're the biggest agency on the ground.
ஐநா சபையின் அலுவலகத்தை இந்த மனிதர்களுக்கு மனிதாபிமான அடிப்படையில் உதவிகள் செய்வதற்கு ஒரு வழியை திறப்பதற்கு நாங்கள் முயற்சி செய்து வருகிறோம்.
Gaza normally receives something like 500 trucks a day. Many of them are fuel trucks, and that was under a full blockade. When those trucks came in, then they were distributed to different places, right? So it's a very impoverished place. Half the people are living under the poverty line. Many of them are
உதவி பொருட்களை கொண்டு செல்வதற்கு முயற்சி செய்திருக்கிறோம். இதையெல்லாம் உள்ளே வந்தால் மக்களுக்கு உதவிகள்
so you have an already impoverished population now bombarded with the military assault, and so the trucks that did get in, it's really kind of a small fraction of what is required. What's required is regular movement of trucks in and out, medical patients that need services, whatever has to be moved in and out has to happen in a steady, regular way and a predictable way, right? So it can't be that we have fuel for today, but what about tomorrow? And the fuel is so critical because we can't move the assets around the ship without fuel, and we can't run our desalination plants. So the biggest concern is thirst. People literally dying of dehydration because there's simply no water, and the only way the water can come is
Talking about the Gazan casualties, there's also an accusation that Hamas uses them as human shields and not allowing their free movement to safe areas. Is that also something that you witnessed?
காசா பகுதியில் உள்ள பொதுமக்களை ஒரு கேடயமாக ஹமாஸ் பயன்படுத்துகிறது என்ற குற்றச்சாட்டை பற்றி நீங்கள் என்ன சொல்கிறீர்கள்?
So 35 United Nations staff, doctors, engineers, teachers have been killed in the last couple of weeks.
கடந்த 2 வாரங்களில் 35 ஐநாவை சேர்ந்த மருத்துவர்கள் கள அலுவலர்கள் இறந்து போயிருக்கிறார்கள்.
Right? And people are ending up being targets of this violence, whether the violence is Hamas initiated or it's Israeli.
இந்த பகுதியில் ஏராளமான மக்கள் இறந்திருக்கிறார்கள். இந்த இறப்புக்கெல்லாம் காரணம் ஹமாஸ் பிரிவை சேர்ந்தவராய் இஸ்ரேல் பகுதியை ராணுவத்தை சேர்ந்தவர்களா என்பதை முடிவு செய்வது மிகவும் கஷ்டமான விஷயம். உண்மை என்னவென்றால் இங்கே மக்கள் தொகை மிகவும் அதிகமாக இருக்கிறது.
Director, can you talk to us about the situation in West Bank? We also see raids happening here, people dying in camps here. Can you talk about the situation in West Bank also, while there is a huge humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
It's sort of like not exactly business as usual, but the West Bank has been a very volatile place for a long time. Well over the last, I've been here for a year and a month.
Gaza பகுதியை போலவே வெஸ்ட் பேங்கிலும் மக்கள் ஒரு கடினமான சூழ்நிலையில் இருக்கிறார்கள். மேற்கு கரை பிரதிகள் மிகவும் நல்ல நிலைமையில் நெருங்காமாக இல்லை, அவர்களும் கஷ்டமான நிலைமையில் தான் இருக்கிறார்கள்.
Some of the locations you might have heard in the news, like Jenin and Nor Shams, these are places that have been hit repeatedly by these military engagements, incursions as we call them. They're meant to be search and arrest operations. The constable and saying, okay, we're here to arrest Mr. X or Mr. Y. No, it's a full-scale military engagement, which means armored personnel carriers. Now we see some attacks from the sky, either from drones or from some other aircraft. Because there's a fear by the Israelis that those roads might have improvised explosive devices, different kind of booby traps set up. This causes destruction to the water networks, destruction to the electricity networks, and destruction to homes. So in almost every camp that we have, locations. By these incursions. The incursions are also met now more frequently by armed actors who are in the camp. Right? We have to also recognize that this is not a peaceful place in totality, right? So we do have armed actors that are in the West Bank.
That's exactly what Israel says. It strikes terror cells.
Yeah. This is essentially what the logic is of the military incursion. The problem that I have as a humanitarian trying to deliver services is that
அமைதியான மக்கள் என்று நாம் நேரடியாக சொல்ல முடியாது. இங்கிருந்து பலவிதமான தாக்குதல்களும் நடக்கின்றன.
Because you think maybe there's somebody in there who might be a bad guy means that you put 50, 60 people.
There are collateral losses.
There's a lot of collateral losses in these camps. So
how many
is very, very.
சமூக மக்கள் ஒரு இடத்துல இருக்கிறார்கள் என்றால் அவர்கள் 50-60 பேர் கெட்டவர்களாகவும் இருக்கக்கூடிய வாய்ப்பு இருக்கிறது. அவர்களை அழிப்பதற்காக எல்லோரையும் அழிக்க வேண்டிய ஒரு கட்டாயத்தில் ராணுவங்கள் தள்ளப்படுகின்றன.
Disproportionate in camps because camps tend to be densely populated and often where there might be some fear by the Israelis that there's some armed actors there. But that number, as I say, is nearly double all of last year, all of the 12 months of 2022, where we saw 154 deaths killed. 154 people killed last year. And that was all 12 months, and we're still in October, right?
2022 ஆண்டில் மட்டும் 154 பேர் இந்த ராணுவர்கள் கொல்லப்பட்டிருக்கிறார்கள்.
100,000 plus reservists that have been called up as part of this fight in the Israeli side. Many of them are now in the West Bank. The West Bank is very heavily militarized. You have lots of security forces at the
every checkpoint. ஏராளமான பேர் இருக்கிறார்கள். இந்த மேற்குக்கரை பகுதிகளும் வெகு வேகமாக ராணுவத்தினரால் ராணுவ நடவடிக்கைகளால் சூழப்பட்டிருக்கிறது.
There's quite a lot of traffic in Jerusalem, and they're always kind of, you stop and you come this way, so they're traffic police.
We were delayed by half an hour to meet you.
It's quite normal. But I saw today traffic police with machine guns. That's quite unusual.
Traffic police,
right? So standing with the machine gun while they're waving me through the traffic. That is unusual, right? This, I think, is important for your viewers back home to understand that the context here is extremely volatile. It is extremely militarized, and nearly everybody is armed, whether they're settlers that feel a religious claim to the land, or Palestinians that have a legal right to the land.
துப்பாக்கியோடு கூடிய ராணுவ வீரர்களை எங்களுக்கு வணக்கம் சொல்வதை பார்க்கிறோம். இதிலிருந்து என்ன தெரிகிறது என்றால் இந்த பகுதி முழுவதும் ராணுவமயமாகிக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது என்று தெரிகிறது.
A small country kind of operation. It's a very significant military here, which is present in every
So you see
location.
a disproportionality here.
Yeah, well, the reactions. I mean, when I think sometimes you see, for example, stones that are thrown by Palestinian youth at a checkpoint, maybe a car ramming. Somebody drives their car into a checkpoint. Things that are also bad. I mean, it's not to commend those activities, but the response from Israel is often disproportionate. It's like, well, okay, there were some stones thrown. Let's go into this place with armored personnel carriers and soldiers fully equipped with, body
கார்களை கொண்டு வந்து செக் பாயிண்ட்களின் மீது மோதுவது போன்ற நடவடிக்கைகளை ஈடுபடுகிறார்கள். ஆனால் அதற்கு பதிலடி கொடுக்கும் விதமாக இஸ்ரேல் எடுக்கும் நடவடிக்கைகள் மிகவும் அதிக அளவில் இருக்கிறது.
that it's impossible to walk through a congested village and not see an UNRWA installation. Like I said, we have over 220.
Right.
Whether it's a school, it's maybe a health center, a health point, it's a relief office, it's an engineering team, sanitation laborers in the camps. Those are also UNRWA staff with their UNRWA vests on when they go to work every day. So we're kind of everywhere in UNRWA, and we are then often at the front line. We start every day at 6 in the morning, often earlier. What we can open, what we can't open. There was an
பணியாளர்கள் இஸ்ரேல் பிரதேசத்தில் வேலை செய்கிறார்கள். அவர்களுக்கு ஒர்க் பர்மிட் தரப்பட வேண்டும். அவர்கள் எல்லாம் இப்போது வேலைக்கு செல்வதெல்லாம் மிகவும் கடினமாக இருக்கிறது.
There is no day where we wake up and it's a nice relaxing day. In fact, on the 7th of October, that morning, when I got up that morning, I even said to myself, this is good. I don't have any meetings. I have a little bit of time to maybe catch up on some reading, and then all of this transpires.
I wish a situation comes where you can have several spa days.
ஒவ்வொரு நாளும் எழுந்திருக்கும்போது இது அமைதியான நாளாக இருக்கிறது என்று நாங்கள் முயற்சி செய்வோம். 7th October அன்று கூட நாங்கள் காலையில் எழுந்து அமைதியான நாளாக இருக்கிறது என்றுதான் மகிழ்ந்தோம். ஆனால் நடந்தது வேறு.
The immediate need in Gaza is for a ceasefire and for access of humanitarian supplies and personnel. That's a very tough question because we're at the moment. Let's look at the fuel situation, right? We have enough fuel, as I understand from my colleagues, a couple of days worth of fuel. So if you don't have regular fuel, it means you can't run the desalination plants, which means people don't have water. We're providing flour.
தற்போது மிக முக்கியமான பிரச்சனை என்னவென்றால் அங்கே காசா பகுதியில் எரிபொருள் எதுவுமே இல்லை. எரிபொருள் எல்லாம் தீர்ந்துவிட்டது.
And you've got a queue of people, 1,000 people long, and you've got
இது எங்களுடைய நிவாரண நடவடிக்கைகளை பெரிதும் பாதிக்கும்.
So I think the community is really pulling together. Certainly UNRWA staff are pulling together, as are other parts of the UN family. But the situation is tragic. This is absolutely tragic.
Right. One last question. Israel accuses you of bias against Israel. And this accusation has gone up to the very top against the Secretary General himself. And UNRWA has always been accused of being pro-Palestinians and anti-Israel.
Well,
இந்த பகுதியில் இஸ்ரேலுக்கு எதிராக செயல்படுகின்றன என்று இஸ்ரேல் மீது குற்றச்சாட்டு வைக்கிறது. அதை பற்றி என்ன சொல்லுகிறீர்கள்?
But Israel is also a member, right? And that mandate is quite simple. It's not a political mandate. I'm not in the peace process, right? I'm not a political negotiator. My job and my counterparts, like my counterpart in Gaza, for example, our job is to provide services to Palestine refugees of a fairly basic and fundamental nature in education, health, and other services, until there is a just and durable solution to the conflict. So we're also step back from the politics, right? Until there is a solution to this conflict, we will run the health center. We will provide medicine to those people who are sick. So we're not. We are involved in the middle
of Israel. And you look the other way when it comes to the other side.
No, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair because I've also been very careful about this in my own
your agency at large.
But I think we're also imagine the kind of the difficulty of running an agency in this context. Look at sort of the differences that might be in the narrative and the discussion that happens between Ukraine and Russia, right? It's a very different kind of narrative, very open. Many things can be said here. We're more cautious, but we're also trying to document and being balanced in the way we document some of the violence. So if there is someone who is killed or there's an incursion, we often say this was the result of. There was a militant soldier at a checkpoint. The reaction of the military. Balanced situation. These are not two countries to be neighbors. This is a very different situation. You have a military occupation of a land. The occupier actually has duties and responsibilities to provide services. But as it is now for the Palestinians and for movement restrictions and for their
ஆக்கிரமித்துக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது. ஆக்கிரமித்த பகுதியில் உள்ள மக்களுக்கு நலத்திட்ட உதவிகள் சென்றடைய வேண்டும்.
Thousands and thousands of civilians that are caught up in that mess, who are not political, who are simply trying to go about their normal days. And that's the way that I've experienced in my 28 years in the UN. When you talk to the people on the ground, They all want the same thing. I want my kid to go to school. I want to have a job. I want to be able to spend time with my family.
இங்கே இருக்கிற மக்கள் தங்களுடைய சாதாரண வாழ்க்கையை வாழ விரும்புகிறார்கள். அவர்கள் பள்ளிக்கூடத்துக்கு செல்ல விரும்புகிறார்கள், அலுவலகத்துக்கு செல்ல விரும்புகிறார்கள். அவர்களுக்கு அதற்கான உதவிகளை செய்வது எங்களுடைய குழுவின் வேலை.
Because of the density of Gaza. West Bank is a bit different because of the way it's segmented, but we're watching West Bank very carefully. It's a very volatile place, and the violence with it can be a powder keg.
மேற்குக்கரை பகுதியிலும் நாங்கள் மிகவும் கவனமாக பார்த்துக் கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். ஏனென்றால் அங்கே
more people dying, more violence,
எந்த சமயத்திலும் சண்டை முழக்கக்கூடிய அபாயம் நிறைந்த பகுதி அது.
Collapsing of the economy, those people who can't go into Israel to work, because these communities are also pretty connected, pretty symbiotic. I mean, there's discussions now. I think one proposal from someone senior in the Israeli government is that, we need somebody to pick the guavas, right? We need somebody to pick the fruit. And that would have been maybe done by Palestinians. So that suggestion was, okay, we'll give permits to Palestinians who are only age 60 and above, because they're maybe less of a threat, and they can come into Israel and pick the fruit. I mean, this is the craziness of this. These are communities that have lived together historically.
Extremely challenging times, and you have a humongous challenge on your back. All the very best, Director.
No, thank you very much. Thank you so much. And I'm very pleased that this is, as I said, being discussed in your markets and India. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Director. Thank you. Very kind of you.
Thank you.
ஐநாவுடைய பாலஸ்தீனிய விவகாரங்களுக்கான இயக்குனர் எவ்வளவு சவாலான சூழல்ல காசாலையும் மேற்கு கரையிலையும் அவங்க பணியாற்றிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க அப்படின்னும் அவங்க மேல வைக்கப்பட்ட சில விமர்சனங்களுக்கு அவங்க பதிலளித்திருக்கிறாங்க. காசால உணவில்ல, அத்தியாவசிய பொருட்கள் இப்ப வந்திருக்கக்கூடிய உணவுப் பொருட்கள்லாம் ரொம்ப அடிப்படையானது, இன்னும் நிறைய தேவை அப்படின்னு காசால இருக்கக்கூடிய நிலை, மேற்கு கரையில் இருக்கக்கூடிய நிலை, இவற்றையெல்லாம் விளக்கி கூறினார். ஒளிப்பதிவாளர் லூகஸுடன் ஜெருசலம்ல இருக்கக்கூடிய ஐநா அலுவலகத்திலிருந்து, தலைமை அலுவலகத்திலிருந்து ஹரிஹரன்.
நன்றி ஹரி. சிறிய இடைவேளைக்கு பிறகு செய்திகள் தொடரும். தொடர் செய்திகளுக்கு இணைந்திருங்கள் தந்தியுடன்.